Let's make the Sweet Sugar Baker's No Chill, No Spread sugar cookie recipe together. Here's the ingredients you're going to need. 1 cup of unsalted butter, softened. I softened this in the microwave on the defrost setting for about 15 seconds. 1 3/4 cup powdered sugar, 1 egg, 2 tablespoons vanilla extract, 2 tablespoons almond extract, 4 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 1/8 teaspoon of salt. You're going to want to preheat your oven to 375 degrees, and the supplies that you're going to need for this recipe are a stand mixer. This is a 5-quart stand mixer with a paddle attachment. You're also going to need a separate large bowl with a whisk for mixing together the dry ingredients. And you're going to want a cookie sheet and some parchment paper for lining your cookie sheet. I also like to use plastic wrap for rolling out my cookie dough at the end. So if you have some plastic wrap around, that's what I recommend using. And you're going to need a rolling pin. We're going to be rolling our dough to 1/4 inch thick. I have the Ann Clark rolling pin, which automatically rolls my dough to 1/4 inch thick, but you can use dowel rods that you can get from like a Home Depot that are 1/4 inch thick, and just place them on either side of your dough and roll it out on that. Or you can get the little silicone bands that you can put on your existing rolling pin and use those to measure the thickness of the dough. The first step of our recipe is we're going to add our butter into our stand mixer and cream until fluffy. At this point, I'm going to use my spatula to scrape off the sides and bottom of the bowl and the beater to make sure that everything's getting mixed up and not just stuck on the sides. Our butter is looking nice and creamy though, and fluffy. Now we're going to add in our powdered sugar and cream those together. This is looking really nice. I'm going to scrape off the beater. I'm going to use my spatula again to scrape off the sides and bottom of the bowl along with the beater. Make sure everything is getting mixed up. There was a little bit of powdered sugar down at the bottom and on the sides that didn't get totally incorporated, so I'm just scraping that up with my spatula to make sure it all gets mixed in together. Now we're going to add in the egg and the vanilla and almond extracts. And we're going to mix these up until they're combined. Now this is getting very nicely mixed, but you can see how on the beater right there and on the sides of our bowl right here, there's some butter that isn't getting mixed in. That's why we use the spatula to scrape down the beater and the sides and bottom of the bowl to make sure all of that gets mixed in. Okay, our butter mixture is thoroughly combined, and so in our separate bowl, we're going to mix together our dry ingredients. So we have our flour, baking powder, and salt. And we're just going to whisk these together until they're completely combined. The benefit of whisking your dry ingredients together before adding them into the wet ingredients is that way you make sure that they are completely evenly distributed. Otherwise, you might end up with some clumps of baking powder or salt that aren't completely evenly distributed, and then your dough might taste bad in those spots. We're going to add our flour mixture into our butter mixture. And we're going to mix these together to combine. And you can see the dough is already starting to come together. It's forming little balls, and then it's kind of scraping the dough away from the edges. This is what we want. And if I turn it up a little bit, it's going to help it come together even more. Because ultimately we want it to kind of start forming its own big dough ball that will easily stick together and not be sticky on our hands. And you can see how it's pulling itself away from the sides of the bowl all on its own and forming this nice big dough mass. That's exactly what we're looking for. All right, so our dough came together nicely and it started to pull away from the sides of the bowl, which is just what we're looking for. So now, when you take the dough out of your bowl and you make a little ball with it, it should stick together nicely and not stick to your hands at all. That's what we're looking for. Now at this point, if you're ready to roll your dough out and bake your cookies right now, this is ready to go. Otherwise, if you want to save the dough for later, you can wrap it up in some plastic wrap and refrigerate it until you're ready to roll out the cookies, or you can even freeze it and then it'll last for a long time in the freezer as long as it's kept in an airtight container. Like usually I would wrap it in plastic wrap and then put it in a sealed Ziploc bag as well. But I'm ready to roll out right now, so let's get some plastic wrap. So when I first made cookies most of my life, I would sprinkle my surface with flour and roll the dough out with flour to prevent it from sticking to the surface or to the rolling pin. Then I learned that you could roll between two pieces of parchment paper, so I did that for a while. But the parchment paper tended to get wrinkly and it would leave wrinkles and creases in the dough when I rolled it out. So I have switched to using plastic wrap, and I find that it's my favorite method. I like the way that the plastic wrap just stretches nicely and doesn't stick to the dough at all when you're rolling it out. And then you can use the plastic wrap for wrapping your dough up to save it in the refrigerator or freezer as well. And then you can use your cookie cutter directly on the plastic wrap that's underneath your cookie dough. And it won't stick to it, it'll just come right off. And then you place your cookies on your parchment paper lined baking sheet. And you don't have to leave a whole lot of space between them since this dough is not going to spread. And you can definitely re-roll your cookie dough scraps and just roll them out again to cut out more cookies with them. Okay, I'm going to stick these in the oven at 375 for 8 minutes. Our cookies are baked and they look beautiful. They kept their shape perfectly with no spread, and they smell amazing. Just for your reference, I used a 2 1/4 inch circle cookie cutter to make these cookies, and I ended up making 51 of these cookies. Obviously, your quantity of cookies that you will make will depend on the size of your cookie cutter, but if you make cookies that are approximately 2 inches, you should be able to get around 50 cookies. Once your cookies cool completely, you can either cool them on the pan or remove them from the pan and put them on a cooling rack to cool completely. Then after that, just store them in an airtight container, and you can store them at room temperature for up to a week at room temperature. And then after that, if you wanted to store them for later use, I would suggest freezing them in a well-sealed airtight container in the freezer, and then just remove them from the freezer when you're ready to enjoy them. I wish you all the best in your baking.